Welcome to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. I'm Nate Hedrick.
And I'm David Bright. We're both pharmacists and real estate investors that believe that real estate investing does not have to distract from a meaningful career in pharmacy.
Each episode, we share stories that educate and inspire pharmacists to leverage real estate investing as a part of your financial plan. Hey, David, how's it going?
Hey, good, thanks. How you doing, man?
Great. We just got back from a vacation. We were up in Maine, checking off one of my daughter's goals for the year, which was awesome. So really enjoying the summer. How about you guys?
Yeah, we have been kayaking quite a bit here lately, which is really fun in our part of Michigan. It's trying to maximize this summer while we can. It's a short season, but got to make it worth it. So it's kind of making me think about, and I know Nate, you and I have had these conversations many times, but wanting that like vacation rental to add to our portfolios. And this is the time of year, this vacation season, when I'm like, oh, that's what we need to do. And then, yeah, just as a way to take advantage of both the investment and the vacation opportunity.
We stayed at a glamping resort up in Maine, and it made me think like, man, maybe I should pivot to buying one of these. Like, this is awesome. So I think I just get like that, like dog with a new toy syndrome. I see something cool and I want to run for it, and then I just don't. But anyway, that's where we're at. So definitely enjoying the summer as much as we can.
Yeah. No, I think that relates into today's episode too, because we have someone on that's in a different niche. And yeah, you and I definitely, I feel like we stop these recordings and then we end up continuing to talk and like, oh, that would be so cool. And this is one of those where it's like a niche of real estate investing that doesn't often get talked about, but I feel like has a lot of potential, especially for folks in the medical space.
Yeah, absolutely. So this week we were lucky enough to have Colin Carr on the show. Colin is the CEO and founder of Carr Real Estate, basically a real estate firm that, as he'll get into, is really specialized to helping medical professionals buy the office space they need or rent the office space they need for their practices, whether it be pharmacy, dentistry, podiatry, chiropractic, you name it, like he does it. And it was just such a unique take on something that really, like you said, we've not talked about at all in the past.
Yeah. And I think for folks that want to own long-term, relatively passive real estate, but they don't love the idea of residential for, tenants and toilets and all the reputation that has, even though we try to beat up that reputation every chance we can, but there are still a lot of people that quite reasonably are afraid of long-term residential real estate. There can definitely be some simplicity through more of a commercial space like this. And particularly if you're a person that owns your own pharmacy or know someone that owns their own pharmacy, to own that building and then to know that tenant really well, that could be pretty cool. But even if that's not your flavor of real estate investing, he put a lot of nuggets in here about shopping around and gaining confidence in your investment. So I think there's a lot of notes here, just as an experienced real estate professional like he is, that he was able to convey regardless of your investing strategy.
Yeah, and I think if nothing else, if you take nothing else away from this interview, it's simply that finding an expert in the niche that you are trying to work into, whether that be a real estate agent or a mentor or whoever, it can make all the difference. I mean, some of the stories that he shares really exemplifies the fact that expertise carries a lot of weight and brings a lot of value. So hope you guys enjoy the episode. And again, if you've got ideas like this or know someone that is in a different niche that we haven't talked to yet, please, we'd love to hear more about it. You can always reach out to us on the Your Financial Pharmacist REI Facebook group or hit us up directly on yfprealestate.com. All right, with that, enjoy the interview. Hey, Colin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is awesome, man. We got outreach from you and your team and just thought you'd be a perfect guest to have on to talk about something that we haven't had a chance to talk a lot about. And before I kind of spoil everything, why don't you jump right in, give us a little background on yourself and maybe how you found your way to real estate.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep the short version. I grew up in Michigan and moved to East Lansing when I was 18. I met a gentleman that owned about 13 apartment complexes and hit it off with this guy. And I just started showing up at his office or his house like a couple of days a week, asking if I could run around town with him and to see how he did what he did. And he was gracious enough to let me do that. So I got involved in real estate when I was 18. I started managing complexes when I was 19. And I was just fascinated by it. So I did that for a few years. I moved to Denver, Colorado, where I am today in my early 20s. And I continued along the same, multifamily apartment route. I was managing a handful of complexes throughout Denver. And then I got into brokerage when I was 23. I met a gentleman that worked for Walmart, Wendy's, Blockbuster. He did a lot of like large national retailers, and he was same thing gracious enough to let me come on board with him. And so I did that for a number of years. And then over the course of just getting more exposure to different forms of commercial real estate, I started doing a lot more office and industrial work and moved to a publicly traded large national firm. And I worked there for about 5 years. And I just started doing a bunch of medical. I started finding landlords that were looking to make a change with their listing agents. I had a couple clients that bought medical buildings. I became a landlord agent by default for a lot of medical spaces. And I started picking up, I had a couple of the largest medical REITs in the world that I was doing work for. And bringing this story to a close, long story short, I just had a number of situations where I was working on behalf of the landlord and the healthcare provider, the medical practice did not have representation. And I watched those tenants, those healthcare providers, just get completely manhandled and crushed in the negotiation. And they didn't know it. Like they didn't realize, like we had one deal I remember specifically where the doctor was already overpaying by like $5 or $6 a square foot compared to what they were marketing vacant space at. And on the renewal, we bumped him another couple of dollars a square foot. He didn't have a clue what was happening in the market. And so I had a couple of those transactions where, just cumulatively speaking, the doctors lost literally a couple $100,000 in the negotiation, and they didn't know better. Like they weren't even mad about it. Like they walked away thinking that they did a decent job. We gave them a month or two of free rent, or we gave them some new carpet or paint, and they thought that they, really squeezed the landlord hard, and instead the landlord was, laughing all the way to the bank. So anyways, a couple of those transactions happened. For me, the light bulb went on that the healthcare community needs someone advocating for them. And whether it's a pharmacist, whether it's a dentist, a veterinarian, their focus is their practice or running their business. Typically, they're not trained in this area, and they shouldn't be. I mean, even Chipotle has a team of people that all they do is real estate. Starbucks has a team, all they do is real estate. Charles Schwab, Lockheed Martin, like pick your large national corporation or company. They don't fumble around and just have some random person doing real estate. Like they have professionals they hire on the outside that advocate and use their market knowledge and savvy. So I saw an opportunity and I launched our company in 2009, and we are now I think we operate in over 45 states. And I think right now we're representing over 4,200 healthcare providers or practices across the country with their real estate, and anything from, buying a building, buying land, leasing a space, renegotiating a lease, adding offices, anything that has to do with real estate for healthcare providers, we work in that space.
Very cool. I love the niche within a niche, right? Because even commercial real estate by itself isn't what people naturally think about when they hear real estate. Like oftentimes people think about the single family on the corner that they want to buy. Or even I hear a lot of folks talking about the small multifamily or larger multifamily, kind of where you started with those apartment complexes. So I'm curious, before we get deeper into the medical practice and some of that kind of side of things, just the apartment complex in general, why do you think that people kind of gravitate there with investing? And then what do you think that people aren't seeing about some of these other opportunities that you're describing in the commercial real estate space, where they maybe should give a second thought to investing in commercial real estate instead of the more traditional residential?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan of residential, like single family. I'm a big fan of multifamily, and I'm a big fan of commercial. Each one has, different pros and cons. One of the reasons that people oftentimes, are attracted to residential is because, relatively speaking, if you remove the homeless population, everyone wants a house. Like everyone wants a bedroom, a kitchen, a living room, et cetera. And so anyone's a candidate to potentially lease or rent an apartment or lease or rent a house. So that's one reason. The inventory is a lot more abundant. For every one commercial property, there's usually thousands of homes or at least hundreds of homes. So there's a lot more inventory in the residential area. And I think people also just understand it more because you come home to a house every day or an apartment and you're more familiar with it. For me, multifamily is a phenomenal investment because you're scaling residential. Some benefits like you get a shorter depreciation schedule. So residential is depreciated over 27 and a half years, whereas commercial is depreciated over 39 years. That's not a reason to do or not to do a deal, but you pick up a little bit more accelerated tax deductions a lot of times in the residential world. But I just think it's familiarity when it comes to residential, whether it's single family or multifamily. When it comes to commercial, commercial it is more complicated and it takes a higher level of sophistication. You have to learn things that you probably don't have to learn when you own an individual house or an apartment complex. Maybe if you're in an apartment complex, you're more familiar with the terminology or the systems. But when you get into commercial, you get into like fire or life safety, you get into sprinkler systems, you get into elevators, you get into all these different things that you don't have in residential. There's a heightened level of building code. There's a heightened level of just maintenance of, you have janitorial companies involved, you have landscape companies involved, you have, life safety. You have to deal with city inspections and things that you don't typically deal with in residential the same way. So I think people shy away from commercial because it's a little bit more complicated. Or as in most things, it doesn't take a ton to learn them. You just have to know where to get the information. Like it's not commercial real estate, it's not rocket science. You just have to go somewhere to get the right information. And then once you get the information, then you have to apply it. Like just like residential, you can sit through all the seminars you want to, you can hear all the people you talk about it, but you have to go buy your first rental property. You have to actually get in the game. In commercial real estate, it's the same way. You don't have to go buy a $5 million office building. You could buy a smaller retail strip center, an office condo for maybe $500,000. You just have to get in the game. And I think that's the key thing is most people just sit on the sidelines accumulating information or kind of like a wish list of I'd love to try this someday. Commercial real estate, just like residential, you just got to jump in and make it happen.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that just like you're saying, it's not rocket science, but you have to have the ability to go out and get that information or find the right team to go help you with that information. I think really resonates with what you do with your company. And that is you take people who are clinically minded, physicians, doctors, nurses, dentists, whoever, right? That they're trying to find a space. They don't want to go out and learn everything about commercial buildings, but they need a commercial building to operate their practice. So I guess like maybe just give us a quick overview of what that might look like for someone as a pharmacist, since that's our community, right? If they're looking to open up their first store, like what does that typical process look like for them?
If you're looking at doing a transaction on behalf of your pharmacy or your practice, that's a phenomenal way to get involved in commercial real estate. If you're leasing, you're going to be a tenant, that's a great way to purchase. We help a significant amount of pharmacists buy their own properties, whether it's a retail strip center or it's a standalone building, like maybe in a retail project, or even if it's maybe more of like an office warehouse flex project where a lot of work where people are coming to you and you don't need to have the retail storefront. So if you have a chance to do a transaction as an owner of a business or practice, you're looking at options to lease and you're looking at options to purchase. And really, the economics have to be evaluated more than just what's the upfront cost. Because when you purchase commercial real estate, number one, every time you cut a check, you're paying down principal. So if I had a chance to lease it, let's say $10,000 a month, and I had a chance to own it $15,000 a month, and I'm talking about after you pay for all your build out and all the costs there, all the taxes, insurance, et cetera. But if the $15,000 per month, if $5,000 per month goes to pay down principal, then I'm actually back down to a $10,000 effective payment. And then if I have the ability to write off the property taxes, write off the interest, et cetera, you'll write off the entire lease payment, but you get more deductions too when you start to purchase because you also get to depreciate the property, as we mentioned before. And so you start looking at the cost of owning. It might cost more upfront, but you get a principal pay down. You get to deduct interest and deduct property expenses, et cetera. You get to depreciate the asset, pick up more tax deductions. And so the effective cost of owning could actually be less than leasing, even if the face rate of owning is higher. So, what it comes down to is what are the top properties available for you? Where do you want to be located? If there's a property that's going to give you the highest referral sources, the strongest practice possible, and it's to lease, then you should focus probably on leasing. If it's neutral, if there's two options, one to lease, one to purchase, and both are going to help you build a thriving business or practice, then you're looking more probably at the purchase because you want to pick up those additional benefits. So there's no one size fits all. You're going to look at options to lease, look at options to purchase. You can look at a medical office building or hospital campus. You can look at a retail center. Depends on the type of business you're running. But ultimately, you're trying to figure out what are your top options. How do you narrow down to the most exciting, the most financially feasible projects possible? And then you start looking at how do I negotiate, and that's a whole nother conversation. But lease renewals, additional locations, purchasing, expansions of your current space, anything real estate related, you should have an advisor helping you so they can help you maximize the opportunity.
Now, I think the advisor piece is really crucial because I'm imagining that there's some pretty significant differences between what most people are used for from purchasing a primary residence to purchasing a commercial space. So I want to take a minute, if I could, just throw a few things at you that are things that are process pieces that most people are probably familiar with and see, are they different? Are they the same on the commercial side? So like the first thing that comes to mind is the due diligence process and inspections. If I write an offer on a primary residence, we might have in my area like a 5-day inspection period where you hire a home inspector for a couple $100. They come in, walk around, pass, fail. That's about it. How's that compare on the commercial side?
Yeah, on the commercial side, you've just got a whole nother element of areas you have to inspect or do due diligence on. You still want to have a property inspected and look at the HVAC and so forth, but it's a much more complicated system than a typical furnace or air conditioning unit. You're going to have concepts like, is it sprinklered, as we mentioned earlier? What does that look like? You get into concepts like, what type of power is coming into the space? You could have a panel at the back of a commercial space, and you might think that it has 200 or 300 amps because it's a 300 amp panel, but maybe only 100 amps are actually going into the main panel in the back. And so you have to do a lot more due diligence with what's going on in that space. Who is there prior to you? And can you accomplish all that you want to accomplish, with the build out of your new business or your existing business? You get into concepts like, is it zoned properly? Like, again, if it's residential and somebody already lives there, well, unless there's something weird going on, you're going to be able to still live there because it should meet the zoning requirements. The title company will also do that due diligence for you. When it comes to commercial, there's use restrictions. You might not be able to operate a pharmacy there. You might not be able to operate unless you're a specific form of commercial use there. And so you have to get involved in the building code and so forth. Typically looking at environmental studies, like who was there prior to this building or who has been nearby. It's not that common to find an environmental hazard, but when you do find it, it's extremely expensive to mitigate. And sometimes it can't be mitigated the way that you need it to where you can actually occupy it there in the future. And so you might say, well, this building's been here for 5 or 10 years, but was it formerly a gas station? What was here, 20 years ago? That stuff has to be looked at. Again, we're not scared about that. We're not, fearful, but you still have to do that due diligence. So you've got the property inspection, just like you would in residential, only it's a lot more complicated and detailed. You get into structural issues, you get into foundation issues, you get into stuff like that. You get into the zoning, you get into environmental, and there's other things that you're doing. So it's basically the same thing as residential. You're doing your due diligence, but it's heightened and you have to pay more attention. And you have to typically bring in 3 or 4 experts, not just one, maybe handyman who looks around the house. Like you need to bring people that's all they do is surveys or all they do is environmental. And then you're working a lot closer with the title company as well to make sure that there's not some deed restriction to where you can't occupy the space or your business won't work there for some reason.
Yeah. So that sounds like then there's probably not just this 5-day. We're probably talking a much longer period, and it's probably not like a 21 to 28 day total purchase process. It's probably longer as well.
Absolutely. And a lot of commercial purchases, especially for business owners, you can go conventional financing or you can go SBA financing, SBA being the Small Business Administration, so government-backed loan. If it's an SBA transaction, you're going to need probably at least 60 or 90 days to close that and maybe further. And then a lot of times, too, on a commercial transaction, depending on who the lender is, and a lot of times the SBA requires this, they might require you to have full construction documents completed. So you design like architecturally the space, then you engineer it with mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, then you turn it into like the 2 foot by 3 foot blueprints that are 40 pages. Then you have to go and actually get a permit from the building department or county. And you have to have a contract signed with a contractor in order to close on that property because they don't want to loan you money. Let's say they loan you $1 million and you say it's going to cost $300,000 to build it out. And it turns out it's going to cost $700,000 to build it out. Well, you might have already maxed out. So the government doesn't want to give you a loan for $1 million or $1.3 million when you need $1.7 million. So a lot of times, depending on the lender, they're going to require a lot more on the table before you can close. Well, you couldn't get the architectural plans done, the engineering done, the construction documents, and get a permit typically in less than 3 to 4 months in most jurisdictions. It just takes time to go through the city or the building department. And so even if your architect is lightning fast, it takes time to get there. So depending on what your lender requires, it might be a 3, 4, 5, 6 month close actually.
Something you just mentioned, I think is super interesting to me is the build out process, right? So if I buy a single family home, it might take a little bit of rehab. I might put a couple $1,000s worth of work in, or I might have to do a full reno. But typically when you're buying a commercial space that you have a specific use for, I mean, there's a huge build out process of you got to put in the sinks that you need and the counters you need and all the other pieces that go with it. Is that something that a typical agent like yourself in the position that you're in, is that something you help with? Is that something you have to go find on your own? What does that look like for a typical person?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you're working with a good agent, they should have a team of people they can introduce you to in each category that you need help. You shouldn't be hiring an agent that's also your contractor. That's a bad conflict of interest. But the agent you work with should be able to introduce you to a couple architects, a couple contractors, depending on what you need, a couple attorneys. They should help you assemble your team. And you're right, when you're looking at a house, you can typically move in. I mean, if you're doing a more complex project, or maybe if you want to rip out the kitchen, you didn't want to move until it's done, that's fine. But typically you buy the house, you move in, and you start renovating it as you go. In commercial, you can't typically occupy until you get that build out the way that you need it to. And you can't get a certificate of occupancy. And so you've got to go through that process. And that process takes 8 to 9 months typically. I mean, you can get it done maybe in 6 if you're going as fast as possible. And people hear those numbers and they're like, well, no, there's no way it's going to take 6 months or 8 months to build it out. Agreed. It might only take 2 or 3 months to build it out, but it's all the things that we just went through ahead of time before you get the paper that says you can now swing a hammer in the space. And so it's not just, how fast can I build it out? It's how fast can you get through the architectural, engineering, building department process? How do you satisfy your lender, et cetera? Then you swing hammers. Then you've got to actually get like the IT installed, all the equipment and technology in there. And then the city's going to come back again and say, yes, it's good, or no, you're still missing this. And then finally, when you get that piece of paper saying, yes, you can open for business, you're ready to roll. But that could take, again, 5-6 months is lightning fast. It's usually closer to 8 or 9 months.
See, that's such a good perspective, because I think back to when I was in NCPA in pharmacy school, and we were talking about like pharmacy ownership, and it just felt like a thing you did. You went and bought a pharmacy and then you started running it like the next day. And like that, obviously that's not how it works, but you don't really sit down often and think about those details. It also makes me think about, what other people are on that team. You mentioned a little bit about, having a team of people you can refer somebody to. We've mentioned a few people along the way, but like who else is super important and essential as part of that typical team when you're buying?
So architect that design the space, they'll hire the engineers typically, so you don't have to usually go there. That's part of their squad. Contractor, very important, whoever built it out. You get into the lender, who's gonna pay for it. It's very rare to have someone pay cash for a building and pay cash for the build out. And I would tell you personally, just having done this literally thousands of times, you're much better off to keep as much cash as you possibly can. There's a balance there of putting down enough money to get the best financing or conventional loan if you can do that, but you don't want to go just push all your cash into a project. Cash is king. That's cliche, but it's there for a reason. When times get tough, if you've got $500,000 in the bank, that's going to allow you to weather a storm, versus if you put $500,000 of cash into a project and your cash poor and times get tough, you're calling your lender, begging them to give you forgiveness or work with you with the renegotiation of loan terms. So that's just kind of a side point. You're going to be working with an equipment supplier, whether that's, if you're an optometrist, you're going to have the cabinet manufacturer, the technology people, chairs, tables, benches. In pharmacy, you guys have equipment and technology that's specific to your use. And so the equipment supplier, technology, running the IT, the phones, the computers, the data, that's all there as well. You're going to probably be working with a sign company, depending if it's a retail or if it allows for signage, that sign going up there. Same thing. People just think to themselves, I'm going to go buy a sign today. It's like, no, you're going to have 2-3 weeks of design for the sign. You're going to sign off on it, cut them a check for half of it. They're going to tell you that you're now in line, and they'll start manufacturing your sign like in 2 or 3 months. And then they got to have an electrician come out. I mean, so you want to put a big sign in front of a space, you might get that done like in a month or two if they drop everything or if they're not very busy. But typically that's like a 3-4 month process as well if you're moving fast. So the sign company, you're going to have an attorney that's going to help review the purchase contract or the lease agreement. And here's an area where people typically say, well, no, I don't need an attorney. I have a real estate broker. Or they'll say, I don't need a real estate broker. I have an attorney. They're totally separate functions. Like the attorney should not be the one negotiating economic terms on your behalf. They sit behind a desk or a computer all day. They don't have a clue what's going on in the market. And on the other side of it, a real estate broker can't practice law. They can't actually mark up a lease and tell you how to protect your stuff legally. They're going to lose their license. You can't do that. So you want to have a good real estate agent. You want to have a good real estate attorney. The two should work in conjunction with each other, not one or the other. So that's important. And then you can get into concepts like, credentialing or billing or practice management or consultants. There's a whole other world that's out there for other people. But those to me are the primary people that should be involved in a transaction.
I like that. It makes me think too about properties where you may end up purchasing a multi-unit storefront and leasing out other sections of that building to others. Presumably there's functions there too, in like subleasing or things like that. But then it also makes me think of, I'm seeing headlines about, commercial real estate is really hurting, or particularly office space right now. I think we're hearing a lot of that post-pandemic. So I'm curious your take on just general market and if it would make sense for someone to buy just a standalone pharmacy building, or if it would make sense for someone to buy a larger property that would have multiple tenants in it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start by saying this statement. When the market starts to soften or go down, that is a good thing. Okay. If you are a potential buyer or a tenant in a market, you want the market soft. You want the market to go down. A lot of times those buzzwords or keywords, they're true. They scare people off. And it's like, no, this is like a roofing company hearing that there's a hailstorm. Like they get excited. they're not scared by that. They're like, oh, that's great. More business. When the market softens, it means more opportunity. Right now, we're talking right now, it's July 23. Interest rates are higher than they've been in the last several years. But historically, they're actually back where they were in 2006 and then back where they were in 2001. So we've been here before. You might not have felt it the same way if you weren't transacting or looking at rates up until now. You'd say, well, man, compared to 2 years ago, yeah, but what about the guys that were transacting back in 06, 07, 08? I mean, they were the exact same place now. If you ask someone who transacted in '07 if they wish they wouldn't have and would have waited 7 or 8 years to transact, they'd say, heck no. You got to play the hand that you're dealt. Right now, they're a little bit higher, but they're actually not crazy. They're not where they were like in the 80s or something like that. So interest rate wise, we're still good to go. It's not as aggressive as we'd like it, but you're still able to transact. So to your point, yes, the office market, especially large office users or office space, that market is down right now. And that's because a lot of large corporations are saying, I don't need this many locations. I don't need this large of a space. People are still working from home, or maybe they're doing a split where they work from home 2 days, work at the office 2 or 3 days. And so you're seeing a lot of users condense down into a smaller space. They still want an office space, but they need 10,000 feet, not 30,000 feet or whatever the numbers are. So we're seeing a lot of office users give back space, shrink their footprint, reduce locations. That's softening the office market significantly. I'm for that because I think the office market's been really inflated. The next thing you're seeing is that certain areas like industrial staying really strong. It's softened the last few months, so to speak, but I mean, the last couple of years, they couldn't build the warehouses and distribution facilities fast enough. And you have companies like Amazon coming in, building 1,000,000 square foot facilities, or other distribution companies coming in there. And so industrial has been on fire. Multifamily has been on fire. They can't build them fast enough. Single family, they can't build it fast enough for the most part. It's slowed down the last 6 or 9 months because rates. But I mean, up until a few months ago, multifamily, industrial, single family, just exploding. Retail has stayed really strong as well too. There's been a number of retailers go out of business, but there's been so many new concepts coming to market. There's been so many new franchises, so many new quick serves. I mean, just like for instance, just like where I live, there's been 3 dry sauna franchise concepts coming within a 1 mile radius or a 1.5 mile radius. I mean, just there's always some new coffee shop. There's always some new quick serve. There's always some new fitness facility. And so retail stayed pretty strong. It's a little bit softer than what it was maybe 2, 3 years ago, but not by much. And then ultimately what's happening is we don't have the same new development and construction right now in the last like 4 or 5 years that we had decades ago. And so it's not kept up. People don't track these numbers typically, but like from a development perspective of what we need to develop to stay up with the market or single family housing, we've not had the right ratios. And so it's compressed the inventory. And so again, when I'm out in Denver, it is an ultra tight market. We do a lot of work across the country, but we have some markets where we have a couple dozen clients right now that can't transact because there's no properties available for them. And you'd be like, well, how can they not find a retail space, or how can they not find a medical space? Because in the city that they're in, the submarket, there's nothing available, believe it or not. So that was a very long answer to a short question, but I'd say this. The summary is there's still some very, very good opportunities. The market is still very healthy. Rates are higher. It shouldn't stop you from transacting. And then rates will come back down again. You'll just refinance in a couple of years when they do, like you would on your house or anything else. And so a lot of opportunity out there still, in my opinion.
Yeah. One of the things Nate and I talk about with the residential, the single family space, is trying to find that highest and best use of a property. And like one example would be a 2-bedroom single family house that has 2 living rooms. And maybe there's a way to add a door and a closet. Now you have a 3-bedroom house that rents a lot higher, that appraises a lot higher. You've forced a conversion of sorts of that property into something else. What I'm wondering, based on what you're saying, is are there opportunities out there to take an office space that nobody wants right now and convert it into a medical office next to a pharmacy, next to a 24-hour fitness or something like that, where there'd be some way to create something that wasn't there to solve this problem of there's nothing out there, and also office space, nobody wants it.
Yeah, so the best way to do that as a healthcare provider is to put your trade in that space, to take maybe a less desirable, but to put your trade in that space, build a solid business or practice there. And then when you sell that business or practice, then you require a 10 or 15-year lease to come alongside of that. You can give an option to purchase if you want to, but that is a tremendous way to take real estate and increase its value. It's the exact same thing you just said as far as residential. There's no better use than your own business as a healthcare provider, because you're betting on yourself. And then when you build it up and it's time to sell that, the real estate's going to trade for increased value. It's going to be an above market value typically compared to another, retail or office use. So that's a great way to do it. As far as if you're not looking at occupying and just buying real estate, it really comes down to who is the potential tenant or occupant of the space, and then what will they pay? And so you can have the vision of, I'm going to improve the building or improve the retail strip center, but it just comes down to who is a likely or probable tenant or occupant, and then what's the most they're going to pay. That's going to be based upon what other options are available around them. If you have the only property within like a mile or 2 mile radius, there's nothing else built or developed, or there's nothing that has any vacancy, then that might be a great opportunity for you. If you're competing with 3 or 4 other buildings, and they could do it themselves, or other landlords are willing to put money into their spaces for the right tenants, do you have a competitive advantage? And so, I think the best thing people can do, especially as a pharmacist, is could you put a pharmacy in there? Could you put a practice in there? Could you draw other ancillary services or uses that would want to be close to you? And if so, that's a great way to buy commercial real estate, increase its value. And then when you go to sell that pharmacy, you're going to write a lease or require them to purchase the real estate from you, and it will be at typically an above market price. And that's a requirement for them to buy your practice or your business as well too. And if they don't, then there's no transaction. So again, I'm not saying gouge them or it's worth $1 million, you charge them $2 million. But if a traditional buyer, if it was vacant, would pay $1 million, and you've got a pharmacy there and it's thriving, could you get 1.2 or 1.3 or 1.4? Probably. There's going to be a premium because of the business being associated. Just like Starbucks will pay a premium for a building with a drive-through that's a standalone with a big sign. They'll pay a premium over that versus a cheaper space. There's a similar concept there.
So that makes me wonder, there's probably somebody like sitting in their car right now listening to this thinking, man, I've driven past that place 50 times. I would love to put a pharmacy in there. Or, if I'm one of those people, or if I have a concept for a business model like that, what's a good first step? Like, what do I do first to start down that road of like, hey, this is something I want to explore?
So the first thing you should do, in my opinion, is contact someone who specializes in healthcare real estate. They're going to understand the landscape. They're going to be able to answer a lot of your questions quickly. They're not going to force you to transact. They're not going to force you to move forward if you're not ready, but they can get you the information quickly that's going to empower you to say, yes, let's look further into this. Or no, I've got enough information, it's not feeling right, or I don't want to do this. And then you don't waste any mental energy driving by the same property for the next 2-3 years wondering. You go right to the source, and they tell you, hey, yeah, you picked a beautiful property. That property right there is $40 a square foot in base rent. The operating costs are $20. It's $60 a square foot. And the numbers will not make sense for you unless you're doing X, Y, and Z. And then you just say, okay, great. That's like driving by you're in the market for $1 million house, and you keep driving by the $4 million house. Just, hey, put it out of your mind. That's not your next house. Maybe in the future, but it's not your next one. And so they can give you information that's helpful. The other thing they can do is they can get you in touch with lenders that specialize in lending to pharmacists. And so a lot of people don't realize this when it comes to any healthcare provider, but there's lenders that specialize in lending to pharmacists or dentists or veterinarians, and they'll do loans that a traditional lender won't do. You guys have probably covered this in the past, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating this with people, but every lender says, or every bank says, we love healthcare. Well, sure they do, but they don't have a healthcare specific product. Like, they advertise healthcare on their website, or they say we love healthcare. They maybe even have a tab on their website, but do they have a healthcare specific product? There's a number of lenders that do, and there's lenders out there, for instance, they'll do a commercial real estate purchase for a pharmacy with no money down, 100% financing, and they'll go to excessive numbers that you wouldn't think. I mean, we've done some pharmacy transactions that are up like in the $6-7 million range with no money out of pocket. whether it's $500,000 or $1 million, and you can put money down again if you want to, but there's lenders that specialize in pharmacy. And so that's going to tell you, hey, you can actually maybe afford a larger building, or you can afford a property with a couple additional spaces and then rent them out, et cetera. And so a good real estate agent, a good lender, that's a great place to start.
I love that. That's great. Again, this show is all about how to get started and people getting from where they are now to where they're going next. So that's super good advice. So I want to just ask a couple of final questions here. I really appreciate all your insights so far. But you obviously have a busy business that you're working on day in and day out. And I think, again, we're talking about building businesses and things in that vein. So how do you stay working on the business rather than getting stuck working in the business?
Well, for me, delegation is very, very important. You got to have a great team of people around you. In the beginning, you might be the one wearing, 10 different hats. That's what I was doing in the very beginning. I was the one working with the website designer and the marketing company and, all the different people. But eventually you get to the place where you've got to start delegating and bringing in people that you trust, that you can surround yourself with, so that it frees you up to take on the projects or the issues that somebody else can't handle at the same level. You can typically pay someone to do very good work that frees you up to go on to the bigger picture concept. So I find a lot of people, they death grip every area of their business, or they're micromanaging every area. You can't do that eventually. You can start that in the beginning. I'm not opposed to learning each aspect of your business, but you've got to get to the place where you delegate, you trust other people, you empower people. And eventually, if you're going to be successful and scale to any level, you're going to have a team of people around you. And so I think that's probably the top thing. I also think that hiring outsourced people to help you is another huge aspect of it. So, whether it's the attorney or it's the financial advisor, it's the consultant, it's the outsourced insurance broker that's going to go shop 17 insurance companies for you, whatever it is, just don't spend time doing things that other people that they spend their entire career doing or their day doing do better than you. Like, for instance, when it comes to attorneys, I have 6 or 7 different attorneys depending on what the use is, because they're so specialized. If I need something for my own personal real estate, I have my own personal real estate attorney. If there's a question about employment law, I have an employment law attorney. And so you have people that help you that are specialized, and it's the same thing in all the different areas: marketing, consulting, website, SEO. You bring in people that specialize, and you don't have to learn everything. You have to learn enough about it to say yes or no to make the decision. But you shouldn't be the person who's, typing code at the back of your website. You shouldn't be doing that, in my opinion. You should be running the business and then telling someone else to do that for you.
That last example hit home. There was definitely a couple of nights when I first started my website of typing my own code. And I'm like, what am I doing on WordPress right now? This is awful. So yeah, really good point. And one that hits home.
I think in the beginning, you do whatever you have to do. You're the owner and the janitor. If you got to scrub the toilet, you scrub the toilet. You do what you have to do. But eventually you get to the place where you can't afford to do it. I always joke about this one, and this is, people always push back on me, but I talk about mowing your own yard, okay? And people will hit me and say, oh, I love mowing my yard. It's therapeutic. And I'll have people say, well, I don't trust anyone to get the lines the way that I want them. And I shift the pattern every week. I mean, people come out the woodwork to defend mowing their own yard. And I'm just like, look, for me personally, I'm in Denver. Every Monday morning, 3 or 4 guys descend upon my yard at 8 o'clock, and they are literally in my yard and out of my yard in 15 minutes. It would take me an hour and a half to do that. And it's I pay these guys $35 a week. And you can say, well, that adds up. It actually doesn't compared to what I could be doing. I was in front of my computer this morning working on the phone while people were mowing my yard. And you have to decide, is it worth me saving $35, or is it worth me being in front of my computer building a business? And so I love that analogy. People get mad at me for that one because they protect them mowing their yards. Mow your yard, go get it, okay? But you just have to realize you can't be in certain places when you get to a certain type of business. And it's a lot more of a success strategy to figure out how I can delegate, how I can remove things off my plate so I can go on to the bigger projects that somebody else can't do. I can pay someone to mow my yard, but I can't pay someone to be on this podcast for me or do what I do at a higher level.
Absolutely. Even if there's those embarrassing moments in the handoff, I remember when I handed my books that I had done for the real estate to an accountant and had these really, and he's like, that's what you did? And I'm like, yeah. But yeah, getting professionals in there, people that do what they do, they're going to do it faster. They're going to do it better. I wholeheartedly agree. What's one other piece of advice that you give a pharmacist or another healthcare professional that's contemplating a start and they think they might want to get into this?
Well, let me give a quasi-technical tip right now. but it's one that we hit with every one of our clients. Anytime we're doing a commercial real estate transaction for their practice, all right, we are always negotiating with 3 or 4 landlords or sellers simultaneously. And this is an unusual one because a lot of times in residential, like you might look at properties online or you're working with an agent, and then you find that house, you maybe go look at it and you like it, and you're like, let's put an offer. You put an offer, and if the seller says yes and they sign it, you're under contract. In commercial real estate, you're typically negotiating on a non-binding basis through either a letter of intent, an LOI, or a request for proposal, an RFP. And it's very common to go back and forth with a landlord or seller 3 or 4 times before you get to final terms. And it's very common also to negotiate with 3 or 4 landlords simultaneously. That's the only way in a commercial real estate transaction you can be certain that you chose the best property. If you just pick one property and you start negotiating the lease rate and the build-out allowance and the free rent package and the annual increases and all these other concepts that are part of the negotiation, you don't have a benchmark or a plumb line to measure it against. Like, you literally are just saying, here's where they started and here's where we ended, but you don't know if that's a good, an average, or a bad deal. If you negotiate with 3 or 4 landlords simultaneously, and one landlord's willing to give you $150,000 for build out, and the other 2 are willing to give you $200,000 for build out, you know that you can push that landlord further, or that they have a more aggressive or a less aggressive deal, and it gives you intelligence, market intel, to where you know what you can or can't get away with in a good way. I can push this guy harder here. Hey, this guy's so much further in front of these other 2 offers, or the concessions are high here, but the lease rate's also high. It gives you market intelligence to where you can make an informed decision. And why I like that as well too is you don't want to sign a commercial lease with the lease term being, a 5, a 7, or a 10-year deal, and then wonder for every day for the next 10 years if you got a bad deal, or if you should have pushed harder, or if you should have talked to other landlords. Like, you want to get to the place where when you say yes and you move forward, you know unequivocally it was the best deal possible. You can't make a property out of thin air. You can't force a landlord to do a deal they don't want to do. But you can say, I looked at all the top properties. I whittled it down. I pre-qualified. I went 3 or 4 rounds of negotiation. I didn't leave any money on the table. And when I did move forward, I know that I got the best terms possible. That peace of mind is invaluable. Again, you can't buy it cheaper next month at Costco. You overpaid, because you were in a bind. And you bought it at Walgreens. I can buy it cheaper here. Like at Costco in bulk, you can't do that. Like, you have to go in there and say, I got one crack at this apple every 5, 7, or 10 years, and I want to make sure I do it the right way.
Well, Colin, I've really appreciated everything you've brought to the show today. Your advice and expertise is awesome. I appreciate you sharing that with everybody. If people want to reach out or learn more about your business, where can they find you?
The best way to reach us is our website, and that is carr.us. So it's CARR.us. Upper right-hand corner, you can click to find an agent, and regardless of what state or city you're in, we've got someone who can help you. You can start a conversation that way. And then we also have a really amazing resource tab too. So if you just want to get educated on commercial real estate terminology or FAQs or glossary, if you want to watch some videos, if you're the type of person that likes to get educated before you go to the next step, we've got literally hundreds of videos, blogs, articles, best practices that you can look at. And so hopefully something for everyone.
Awesome. All the nerdy pharmacists out there are really excited to go dive into that. So
yeah.
Seriously appreciate your time today, Colin. And again, just thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much. Thanks for listening to the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. If you like what you heard in today's show, please leave us a review and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. If you have a question, know someone that would make a good guest, or want to connect with us, head on over to yfprealestate.com and join the growing YFP Real Estate Investing Facebook group.
As we conclude this week's episode of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast, an important reminder that the content of this podcast is provided to you for informational purposes only and is not intended to provide and should not be relied on for investment or any other advice. Information in this podcast and corresponding materials should not be construed as a solicitation or offer to buy or sell any investment or related financial products. We urge listeners to consult with their financial advisor with respect to any investment. Furthermore, the information contained in our archive newsletters, blog posts, and podcasts is not updated and therefore may not be accurate at the time you listen to it. Opinions and analyses expressed herein are solely those of your financial pharmacist unless otherwise noted and constitute judgments as of the dates published. Such information may contain forward-looking statements which are not intended to be guarantees of future events. Actual results could differ materially from those anticipated in the forward-looking statements. For more information, please visit yourfinancialpharmacist.com/disclaimer.
Thank you for your support of the YFP Real Estate Investing Podcast. Have a great rest of your week.